I need to, read this book, and then this book didn't give me what I wanted. So instead of feeling bad, I try something different and see if that works instead.
Hey guys, it's me, Daniel with Socratic Hobbits. Kyle and I have a pretty good episode for you here. Top 5 for sure, I would say. And we talk about iterating. What to do when you try to change something about yourself or try to change something and it doesn't work. Hope it's helpful. Hope you enjoy. Thanks for listening.
Do you know what we're talking about? What do you think we're talking about, Kyle?
I was thinking we're either going to talk about one of three things.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to talk about how to journal, or
Okay.
you're going to teach me how to journal, or we're going to talk about the best tips or habits that we've picked up from mentors or friends, which was a suggestion from an avid listener. Or we're going to talk about something else.
Was that third thing?
Just like literally anything else.
Anything else? No. We have to be focused now. That's what the people have wanted. That's what they decided.
We'll be focused on one of anything else.
I thought that we had one other good thing that was, it was iterate.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So you thought it was passe. I actually kind of like, hurt is the wrong word. I didn't like that you said that was passe. That's okay.
Well, I think it's kind of, it depends on where you're at in the curve, right?
Uh-huh.
Like if you're closer to the leading edge, it's definitely been out of vogue for a few years. But I think it's still pretty heavily in sort of the middle to late middle of kind of the internet consciousnly.
Sure. Well, I'm not actually that interested in talking about things that are in vogue or not in vogue or whatever. I'm interested in talking about things that are helpful to me and to other people. So, which is why I changed it from Fail Forward, which was a book written by John C. Maxwell in 2000, to Iterate, because that's really what that's getting kind of at, is the idea that you would try something enough to know that it's either not working or that it is, and then discard the parts that aren't working and move forward with what is.
One of the terms I've heard thrown around recently is mini experiments or micro experiments.
Yeah, and that I thought would be interesting to talk about, related to many things that we talked about last episode, is just talking through the scientific method and what it's good for and what it isn't.
Right. Yeah, that was actually one of the things we had discussing before that podcast, right?
The scientific method?
Yeah, and what it's useful for and what it's not useful for. Not necessarily what it's not useful for, but when to use it and when to be more or less cautious about using it, I guess.
Well, it seems like I at least have a little bit more energy around that right now, but I would be more than happy to talk through journaling with you. In fact, some people don't know this, but there's a blog site of Socratic Hobbits as well, and I've just published a few articles there, and one that isn't yet published is like, how do you start journaling? What do you do? So I'd be more than happy to talk about that as well. It's something I've thought a lot about, and yeah, can just kind of riff on. So either one of those, man. I'm excited about both. What's more interesting to you?
Let's save the journaling one, because I feel like that's one that we can always come back to.
Ooh, yeah, sure.
It's a nice one to have in the back pocket in case we can't come up with something else.
Yeah. Our suggestion from one of our most contributing listeners, I think that's going to be really good. So I'm actually going to read it, if that's okay. It takes me a minute to find, but for the listeners, it's just as if there was no time at all. So the feedback we got was, I would enjoy listening to a podcast episode where we talk about some of the things we've learned from mentors and friends, anything from life hacks and habits to routines or spiritual lessons, best practices at work to fun facts. I don't know how many fun facts we have. Yeah, so just you and me both sharing, and then which of these have been particularly important or memorable, etc. So yeah, I think that'll probably be maybe next episode, or I've got two guys who are willing to come on and would be really fun to have.
Cool.
So Probably not in the same episode. They're quite different.
That can be fun too.
Yeah, yeah, it can. It was actually for me. It was pretty stressful having four people. Mostly because I don't know when it's just you. I can remind myself pretty easily to slow down because I talk fast when I'm excited or when I'm nervous. And I kind of felt a little bit like Holmes and with three Sherlocks. Uh, or two and a half.
I think there was one Sherlock there, and he has a PhD.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I wish Jonathan had been able to talk more because every time he did, it was really good. So next time, Jonathan, you get yourself some better Wi-Fi or go over to Isaac's house. I don't know how far do they live close enough to do that.
Isaac lives about 20 minutes away from me.
Oh, I don't know where Jonathan lives, so that isn't helpful.
Well, Jonathan currently resides in Vancouver, not too far from you.
Oh, well, he just come over to my house then.
Yep.
We'll make that work. Gosh, I didn't. Yeah. Anyway, whatever. Yeah. So let's save. We'll save journaling for later. The one thing is that the men's group that I've been a part of for a long time. I think that's something that would be very useful for them to, and the blog article as well, which I can post at any time. But there would be like that's useful no matter what like time of the year or like it's very out of time. So it might be good just to record that and have it, and then we can post it at any point. So well, let's talk about so we're going to answer a couple of questions, but they're all kind of closely related.
Right.
So what is the scientific method, very briefly, and then what is it useful for? What isn't it useful for? And then what was the part B of that? That was super related. That is like, well, then we would talk about the scientific. Oh, iterate.
Should we be when should we be careful about using it?
Oh, sure. When should we be careful? And then how do you kind of apply that to personal habits and behavior change? Because I think that's where it's useful for me personally. There's scientific method for
iterating.
Yeah, for iterating. Having a hypothesis, testing it, and going on and so forth. So do you feel like you could talk through the scientific method in a minute or two or 5 minutes?
Yeah, I mean, you just mentioned a couple of the key points there. You come up with a hypothesis that you want to test. You design your experiment in a way that focuses your test on validating or invalidating that hypothesis. And then you run your experiment and assess the data and determine if there's support for your hypothesis or if there's a lack of support for your hypothesis. And then take note of any other findings that may be interesting for future experiments and proceed from there.
Yeah. There's a couple of key things. Like when you've got a hypothesis, it's really important that you check that, like as you're experimenting, that your experiment is really focused on your hypothesis, because the things that you can't control,
right,
or control for, you can't test.
Yep.
And so there's control variables, and then is it just regular variables? Is there another name for that? There's controlled and whatever you're testing for. But in the same way, you wouldn't you just can't test for something that you haven't either controlled out or that you're specifically like. If you got an easy example for me is algebra, right? If you've got 8 variables that are all different letters and you're trying to solve for a specific one, it becomes very difficult if you don't. Well, then maybe that doesn't work because.
Well, it's impossible.
Well, yeah, it's basically impossible.
But I mean, that's kind of the point, right? Is if you don't have an equation that can solve for, I mean, taking the algebra example, you need to have as many equations as you have unknowns. And if you have more unknowns than you have equations, it's not solvable. And even if you do have, getting into the design of experiments a little bit, even if you do have enough equations for your unknowns, typically in the real world, you're going to have uncertainty for each one of those equations. And that uncertainty compounds on top of itself, which is why statistical methods for looking at or understanding the statistical methods for looking at significance are important
Mhm.
for drawing any sort of useful conclusion out of your experiment.
Yeah, which is one thing that's my wife has talked about how method of measuring significance that was normal, or I even remember from when I was in college and high school, that you no longer use because it's so easily hacked. Um, by if you've got a large enough set of data, you can essentially create significance by mixing and matching, which is why it's so important to have a um, really specific hypothesis before you start that you're testing for, and not coming up with it after the fact.
Because that model can be manipulated doesn't mean it's not useful. It just means that it's been manipulated enough. I think your wife's point has been manipulated enough that people on review boards no longer trust that method when they see it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why it's typically not used in scientific practice professionally. But for us as amateurs, I believe it's the R squared that she was referring to.
Yeah, I think so. That sounds right. I don't know though.
The first linear regression, which is the first thing you're able to do if you put a bunch of data into Excel,
Mm-hmm.
And plot a line against it. But you can still use that, but that gets back to being really honest with yourself about what the variables are, what the uncertainty around those variables,
Mm-hmm.
or what the uncertainty around your equations that go into solving for those variables are. And then if the picture looks hazy as to whether you found a significant result, accept the fact that it is hazy.
Yeah, well, and in college, the experiments, at least the ones that I did, I graduated with an accounting degree, so not anything to do with science. They were basically like the experiments were set up ahead of time, and so and we just ended up doing them and then discussing them and talking about how we might have done them if we had to, it was very like um, for lack of a better term, it was like, what's that?
Canned.
I was gonna say like it's roller coastery. Like, yeah, there's like a little bit of rocking back and forth. There's a little bit of variance,
Oh yeah.
and then but you're on a track.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was kind of my experience. And I think part of why they don't use that anymore or at a professional level is because it was abused so much, and there's basically no money or like no grants for retesting hypotheses. But when people have tried to recreate certain experiments, it's like they don't get they don't get what the person who wrote the paper did.
Right.
But the person that wrote that paper received a lot of money, a lot of grant money, and it's widely accepted as true, but nobody ever redid the experiment because there's not a lot of incentive to, which is one reason why capitalism isn't fantastic for science or scientific progress outside of certain realms, or when you don't know what that return might be.
I would argue that any economic system, like I can't think of an economic system that would be
Ideal.
ideal for science.
Yeah, no, I don't think there is. So maybe capitalism is no worse, no better. It just is.
Because I mean, you had the same issue with the Soviet 5-year plan, right? Where it was, you will get to this result at the end of 5 years.
Mm. Yeah, that doesn't incentivize honesty,
Right.
for them.
Well, and that kind of goes back to why a lot of the original scientists were essentially wealthy people who had time on their hands and a curious mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, they didn't have anything to prove because they'd already proved it, or it was something that didn't concern, like the money part of it wasn't something that concerned them.
Right. They were provided for. They
Mm-hmm.
didn't have to worry about putting bread on the table or a roof over their heads. And so they could just explore creation.
They could chase their joy.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding. Something else I learned about after editing podcasts so this is episode 15, is that I fidget a lot, like a lot. There's one episode, I don't know if I was just doing it, which is why I'm mentioning it now. But
Okay.
did I tell you that I opened and closed a knife that was in my, like a pocket knife? I was just kind of fidgeting with it. It was that time that we did a podcast and I was super tired.
Okay.
I tried to edit most of them out, but sometimes I was doing it while I was talking, and it was like
click, 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 click.
exactly.
Huh.
Anyway, yeah. So, and then even as I was talking about it, I was thinking about, you can't see my hand, but okay. So that's the scientific method. We've even kind of started to broach what it's good for. It's good for when you know the variables, when you are in a more controlled environment.
And by control, do you mean an environment where you can account for the variables with experiments, which essentially, going back to the algebraic analogy, your experiments are your equations,
mm-hmm.
and your variables are what you're trying to learn about.
Yeah. So that would be
or your unknowns.
Mm-hmm. Well, but even when you're doing experiments, so we're gonna shift into talking about doing experiments with ourselves,
mm-hmm.
more in behavioral than I've never done any biomedical experiments on myself. I definitely have heard about people doing that, and
Tim Ferriss style,
yeah. But I'm not in that spot. I don't know that I ever will be.
Well, wait a minute. You've done intermittent fasting.
Yes, I have done intermittent fasting.
And evaluated how that impacted different health markers.
Yeah, that's true. I did do that. I guess I don't.
Why wouldn't you count that?
I guess I think of when I'm thinking about.
You have to draw blood.
Yeah, there's got to be some blood. Why do you always laugh quietly? You have to laugh into the mic, Kyle. You have to let the people know that you're laughing.
Well.
Next time.
Just laugh loud for both of us.
No, I guess the reason I wouldn't consider that biomedical is because I'm not doing anything to myself. I guess I'm abstaining from a behavior, or I'm
That's interesting that you frame it as a behavior instead of framing it as like food content or nutritional content.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And timing.
Hmm.
Because that's how I think of it, is how am I changing up nutritional content and nutrient timing, not a behavior as much. But it can be both.
Sure.
So it could be a psychological experiment or a more physiological experiment.
Yeah. So would you consider working out a specific amount not behavior, or you would think of it primarily as not a behavior, instead you would think of it as like a biomedical?
Yeah.
That's interesting. Well, in any case, in either of those situations, you can control quite a bit of you can control the inputs and then see what the outputs are. And so that's a good place for those kind of self experiments. And so that would be, because you can control. I guess actually one thing about both of those situations is that they're very repeatable. So doing an experiment to test stage fright related to your high school graduation would be terrible, because you only get one, like you
only get one data point.
Yeah, you only get one data point, exactly. So what's more helpful is, bedtime routines, morning routines, what you do on your lunch break or lack of lunch break. Is it better for you to get off half an hour early if your work allows that? You could play around with those things. Or, normally everyone at your work takes a half hour lunch, but, I did this where I got off half an hour later than everybody and took an hour lunch and like worked out, as opposed to went into the break room, ate my lunch, and sat around for 10 minutes. That was what everybody else did. That was a couple years ago. I tried that out. So that was another situation where experimenting might work out. And again, I guess I think of all of those things.
If we can step back just a second there, when you were, because I think this will be helpful to the audience just as they think through what experiments they'd be doing and how to know when you're done with the experiment. So what led to you stopping the workout routine during lunchtime? Was it you achieved a certain goal, or you weren't seeing more progress, or how are you measuring that? Or was it just sort of a life change?
Yeah, so that was a specific job, and that was 4 jobs ago. It was my first job out of high school, 5 jobs then. And it worked in that, there was a place to run that was close. And so I did that until I stopped working there. What I now do is I walk for 20 minutes on my lunch break, and I do that every day, rain or shine. With no, even when I'm home now, I work from home 1 day a week, and I've been doing that as well. I think I'm a little bit of an odd duck at my work. I'm the only person, and I heard our I heard our we had a bid yesterday, and at least I thought I heard the president of our company ask where I was, and then answer his own question is like he's probably out on a walk or something. And I thought that was kind of funny because I wasn't. I was obviously I heard it, and then my direct boss gives me a hard time because I bring an umbrella with me if it's pouring rain, and like I've started to make a point of like waving to him as I'm leaving with the umbrella because he said I look like a pansy basically. So
Mary Poppins.
yeah, Mary Poppins. There you go. It's pretty.
Is that what he said?
No, that is not what he said.
Oh,
Um,
can you share on the show what he said?
yeah, what he said was it looked like I wasn't originally from the Northwest, and he might have insinuated I was like a girl. So that is why I wasn't saying that, because I don't know.
Construction guys.
Yeah, construction, manly. If you're gonna have to be outside, then you got to get wet. Like, yeah, but I sit in an office, so there's no reason for me to be soaked if I don't need it. If I was out on the job site, I wouldn't have an umbrella with me, that's for sure. But yeah, they're there, so why not? Yeah, so that's actually something that I've taken from job to job. There's only when I worked for one company, this is the only company that I haven't worked out on my lunch break or done something that's like active. That wasn't active on my lunch break as a break in the middle of the day, and I've just found that really helpful. It helps me get through. It makes the afternoon feel like it's a little bit shorter, and just gets the blood moving. And when you sit for 8 hours a day for work, it's good to do that. So yeah, do you do anything on your lunch break other than eat? Do you take a lunch break?
I generally just eat while doing work.
Yeah.
And then shorten the day.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a lot of people who, I mean, pretty much everybody else in my office does that, but 20 minutes really isn't that long. And I feel good. You might try it. See if it makes you feel how it makes you feel.
Well, for me, I walk 20 minutes to work in the morning and then walk 20 minutes home in the evening.
I'm not saying you have to, Kyle. I'm just saying you might try it.
I'm just saying I already get 40 minutes of walking in a day.
Okay.
I'm not too keen to get more walking in.
All right. So that's things that work well, and one thing that experiments don't work well on. Is there anything else you'd like to add to that? Or
I think the thing that's, and we've kind of already talked about this, but the thing that's really crucial is designing the experiment in a way that you're testing what you actually want to be testing, which then taking a step back requires having an intuition of what you actually want to study. And yeah, I was listening to a kind of I guess it was kind of a podcast, but it was sort of a podcast history lesson on scientific inquiry, and it focused on a particular scientist who then moved into philosophy, and he wrote a book called The Study of Man, but his name, Michael Poliani.
Is that Italian?
No, Polish, I think, Eastern European. And yeah, Poliani. And he was a scientist pre-World War II, and then ended up coming to the States around the time of World War II, or UK first, and then made his way to the States.
Okay.
And he had a very interesting take on science, where he viewed scientific inquiry, broadly speaking, as or at least the best science. He viewed the optimal situation for science is when you simply have studied or worked in the field long enough that you have an intuitive sense for what is right, or what is a right understanding of things and what is a wrong understanding of things. And then your experiments sort of flow out of that intuitive sense that just comes from, I mean, Malcolm Gladwell talked about the 10,000 hours, but it comes out of a similar vein of understanding.
Well, the 10,000 hours didn't come from Malcolm Gladwell. He just, right?
No, it was a study that he popularized.
Oh, I see.
Violinists, I think.
It seems like I guess you do have to be an expert in something in order to kind of push the boundaries. but
And that's what he was talking about, is finding new things, finding novel things.
it seems like you would have to, kind of going back to something we had said a little while back, is you'd have to, in order to find new things, you'd really have to look for kind of the confluence of more than one discipline. Otherwise, I don't know, it just seems like you're going to come up with the same things that people have come up with previously, but maybe not. Which is why I've heard, at least, that almost all the Nobel Prizes today are given to not individuals, but teams, or things that couldn't have been accomplished without a team. But there's still one or two frontrunners because, as people, we like to celebrate other people and not teams of people as much.
Right.
Yeah. Does that make sense or track with what you're saying, or does that feel like that's off a different kind of path? Or
No, I think a team kind of accelerates that.
Okay.
Because you can amass more knowledge and intuition faster with a team.
Yeah. And someone might say the sum of its parts is greater than, or the sum of its, yeah, I'm getting mixed up there. Sum of its parts is greater than the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. There we go. I got it eventually.
Yeah.
You could have one person working with somebody who both had spent 10,000 hours doing something. And then when you have them together, they can come up with something new. But instead of two people, it's 20. Is that kind of the idea that you're getting at? Like how it accelerates, how a team accelerates the.
Yeah. And it's not just the fact that you have two horses running in sync instead of one, or 50 horses running in sync instead of one. It's also the diversity of skill sets, where you have people who can cover for each other so that others can focus on what they're really supremely talented at. So you don't have to have one person kind of doing a little bit of everything. You have,
instead of having generalists, you've got specialists.
Exactly. And then you have those specialists interacting, and they get to see the ideas from the other specialists, which then kind of riffing off a point that you made earlier about a diversity of ideas and bringing different ideas together in an interdisciplinary way to find something novel. That can happen faster when you have really intelligent people all in a group who are specialized in particular areas, but then can see the intersections and overlaps between those areas and apply it to their own practice.
Doesn't this kind of directly contradict being a specialist in 3 different things in order to increase your value? Or are we talking specifically about science here? And I'm calling back to that 75% episode we did.
No, I don't think that contradicts that necessarily. I think you can have both ideas be true, that you can make yourself more valuable by creating a new super skill out of being pretty good at 3 different areas. And so you are a specialist in that super skill.
Oh, and then you got these super skills that all kind of commingle. And then you and I have some of the same, let's say, supporting skills, but a different, but not all the same. And so where they overlap, you and I can
push forward further,
and then also bring in. So it's like, it's almost like if you've got, 5 people and you've got 5 shared skills and then 2 other, I don't know, it's like you've got, instead of having one person with 3, you've got 5 people with 15 all working towards the same thing. I could see how that would be really valuable. But they got to speak the same language.
Yep.
Like, and not, I don't mean like verbally the same, like English.
Well, actually verbally the same language. Yeah. Or it's going to take a lot longer to get it.
Yeah. But I meant, even within English,
you need a common terminology.
Yeah, you need common terminology. I know I spend a lot of time looking up acronyms because I work in the construction industry, and every municipality has their own jargon, and each division within construction has their own. And sometimes they use the same letters because there's only 26. And then even within whatever it's, anyway, yeah. So if they've got to share a lot of context in order to be able to speak, or in order to communicate well. They have to. I guess that has to be probably a base skill. That has to be a base skill for a lot of different things, is communication. Yeah. As far as experiments, though, or as far as, so to sum up where we're at, right? So you've got to be able to control some variables, know what your hypothesis, or actually rather, step one, know what you're testing for and be able to design an experiment around those things. And, in order to actually test your hypothesis. So that's like step number one. Step number two is control the variables and be able to repeat the experiment in order to, be sure that you actually are finding your results. It's not just one and done, right?
And I think that the
Am I simplifying things too much?
No, I was actually going to say the repetition can be useful if you aren't sure about the result, but I don't think it's necessary to repeat the experiment, or at least not repeat the exact same experiment. I think when it comes to personal disciplines or behaviors or activities, running experiments that kind of build on each other can sort of serve that purpose of repetition without being boring.
Sure.
One of the examples I've heard of is like before you juggle with chainsaws, juggle with just tennis balls. Don't go straight to the chainsaw juggling.
Yeah.
But once you get the tennis ball juggling down, then maybe you can go to
knives,
hammers, or
yeah, hammers. Maybe hammers would be better than knives.
Yeah, something that doesn't cut you, but it's still a little bit more dangerous. And so you're repeating the experiment about your skill at juggling, but you're doing it in a way that challenges you a little bit more, and
I like that.
Develops that skill and develops your understanding of maybe this is a little bit trite, but with the juggling example, maybe a better example is something I heard someone in a different podcast talking about, where they were talking to someone who wanted to start a restaurant, and we're talking about how hard it was to come up with the funding so they could find the right venue, or the right space, and get a chef and all these other things. And they're saying, do you even like serving people food? Like just go to your friends, have them pay you to buy food, and then put on a dinner for your friends. And at the end of the night, you'll know, do I like the process of preparing food? Do I like the process of serving food? Do I like the process of procuring all that food? And do I like the process of hosting?
And do I like these people?
And do I like these people? I mean, hopefully they're already people you like, and they'll like you even if the food's burnt or whatever. And you won't be too bent out of shape about having forked over $20 or whatever for the night.
For all the food and you actually would know if you were good at those things as well, because I don't think somebody could, if they weren't good at it. At least I hope those friends would say, you're like, this was fun, but you actually didn't cook my steak at all. Like it was just seared, and that's not how I like my steak.
Yeah. And so you're gonna get feedback, but all you're gonna be out is an evening and maybe some slightly rankled friends.
Yeah. Well, and that was kind of fun. Like that's part of why we're doing the podcast.
Right.
We were not out very much money, though I like constantly push for us to be out more money. Much to our wives' chagrin, I think. I don't know. We'll see. Yeah. So, and actually, that makes me think of another thing. That have you seen any of the knives that Tyler's made?
Yeah, he showed it to us on the growth group.
Oh, that's right. So him and I have talked about starting an online store and calling it Blocks and Blades, and so where he makes. So basically, I'm providing scales to him, and then getting a little bit of money if he sells them.
Cool.
But it's like we can start pretty quickly because it just doesn't cost very much to start up a store. And if it fails, like, oh well, like it's fun.
Yeah.
It's like fun to talk shop with him and to work on something together. And and he's my brother-in-law, and so it's like, so there's extra time there. And it's just like, it's kind of like.
And your sister doesn't mind if he spends a lot of time on it.
No, she doesn't. And like, I'm really enjoying woodworking, and it just works out really well. And I'd really like to make some furniture, but I have like an okay setup for it now. It's not completely hand tools, but it's like, if I could sell that would be cool. That would be really cool. I don't know. It's all down the road. Like I've got to try to
start somewhere.
Yeah, but like even before I get to that point, I have to do some baby steps, and do the friend serving thing first.
Yeah.
I will say though that the like having held, and he gave me one of the knives, and it's very high quality. Like I'm very impressed. It was like knife number 4 for him, and
Uh-huh.
it's pretty amazing. So I'm excited for I'm excited for him. I'm excited for my sister, and hopefully that takes up some of the slack when there's different when you have a slow season for photography or whatever.
Right.
No, oops. Anyway, yeah. So I like that. I like the iterating and especially building on previous. Is kind of where I wanted to get to next was when you experiment, especially in yourself. Like you're trying to, let's say you're trying to work on. See, I always go back to fitness because it's an easy thing to talk about that a lot of people can relate to. But I'm gonna try to push for something else. You got any ideas other than physical health?
Investing
Okay, yeah, we can talk about investing. That's
or business development.
or yeah, pick one. Either of those would be fine. Which is more fun for you?
Or reading books.
I don't need more options, Kyle. Okay, I'm just gonna go with reading books because the steps there are like.
Or cooking.
Oh, you're the worst. You got one more?
You said you're having trouble coming up with ideas.
I know, but now one more.
One more.
Yeah, come up with one more, Kyle. You come up with.
Raising animals.
Okay. All right. So let's say that you want to read books. That's the one I'm picking, I guess. And you.
How to breed dogs.
Did you have coffee today? You seem a little more.
Yeah, but it was many, many hours ago.
Yeah. Okay. Still, you're still on the tail end. You're like a little.
I think I'm still a little loopy from this weekend because we were.
Yeah. What were you doing?
We were flying with 3 kids. And
where did you go?
San Diego.
I don't even know that we even started this off with how are you doing? Hey Kyle, how's it going?
A little tired.
Well, we don't have to go much longer if you don't want. But so let's say you've always wanted to read consistently because you recognize that it's valuable for whatever reason, and so you start off and you're like, all right, I'm going to read a book a week, which is depending on the book, might not be that difficult if it's Dr. Seuss, or it might be more difficult if it's I'm trying to think of some old book that's long.
Would you start there, Daniel, or would kind of taking a page out of Atomic Habits, would you say just have a book that you grab off the shelf and go sit down in a chair and then set the book to the side and then go do something else? Just like get in the habit of sitting down with a book. Like literally you're just sitting down with the book.
Yeah, you could start there. So where I was going to try to basically is a mindset thing, right? So let's say you sit down and you've got War and Peace with you. There we go. One that came to me that was big and old. And you're like, all right, I'm going to read a chapter a day or something. And then, day 1, good to go, because your motivation is super high because you've decided that I want to read high literature and or good literature, and so chapter a day, and you maybe do that for a week, and then
you realize you need to be high to read good literature,
and then you realize you need to be high. Wait, no. But do you want to pick a different book, Kyle? You're super snarky. It's fun. Whatever you did, you should do again for next time. So you sit down with War and Peace, and then after a week, you're like, motivation goes down. You realize you haven't been.
Book is really sad.
I haven't read it, so I don't know. We could talk about Les Miserables. I've read that one. It was a long time ago.
Which translation?
It was an English one. I don't know. It was free on Kindle. It was fantastic. I wept. This is one of the only books I've wept at. Then Where the Red Fern Grows.
I was gonna ask if it was that one. That book's so sad.
No, I'm serious. Yeah, it was. It was very sad. One of the saddest books I've ever read. And actually, I was in 7th grade when I read it, and we were in a class that was basically quiet time for the teachers, and so we were all just. It was like I was a 7th grade boy. My voice hadn't changed yet. I was new to school, and I was like a fat redhead chubby kid, and not no friends, very few friends. And as like a 7th grade boy, it was so hard not to just let it out. It was so sad. But so you get to day 10 and you haven't read War and Peace for 3 days, and you're like, well, I'm a failure. Like, that could be one thought that you have. A more reasonable thought is the mindset of, I put these inputs in and I thought I was getting what I wanted, but that was only during specific circumstances. I want this to be a habit that's all the time, not just some of the time. So maybe I need to start smaller. And maybe it is just sitting in a book, maybe it is just sitting with a book in a chair. You've got the lamp on, and you've completed the task if you pick the book up. And then put it back down and go do the other things that you feel like you would rather do in that moment. But you've still done the habit for the day. And then the thing that's difficult is, I think the thing that's most difficult about that is because you can always, like, if you design the behavior correctly and the prompts, because if you don't have the prompts, you're not going to remember. I don't think any amount of alarms on your phone, paying someone to nag you, or like any of those things, I don't think any amount of those works long term.
Right.
There's a specific kind of, and those are all called kind of context reminders. And then there's the other one, which is, you don't really have to remind you if you're used to eating ice cream every day when you get home. You don't really have to you're never going to have to remind yourself to do that, because you just want to do that because it's it's its own reward, right?
And I think we've talked about this before, but you're talking about reward prompts versus punishment prompts. And the punishment prompts work short term, whereas it sounds like the reward prompts work longer term.
Well, there's a third kind. So there's one where it's like the person themselves just wants to do the thing. And so they don't really need a reminder. They're actually like looking to do the thing. We were talking about Tyler a minute ago with knife making. He's super enjoying that. There's no part, like, he looks for time to do that. He doesn't, it's a habit because of that right now.
Right.
When that changes, which it will at some point, it will lose some of its luster. He'll have to do other things in order to make that a long-term habit, which I think he will. But then there's the like context clues, which are context reminders, which would be like reminders on your phone, or sticky notes on your computer or on your phone, or your spouse calling, like when they talk to you, you've asked them to remind you about something. At a certain point, like, if you just get enough of those, each one is less meaningful.
You develop a callus to it.
Exactly. So the third type is an action prompt.
Okay.
And that's where you are, it's habit stacking from Atomic Habits. Right. So when I get home and I put my backpack down, then I will, and that there's that key phrase, when this happens, then I will X. So sit down with a book in this chair that's comfortable. And that's the whole thing. And then at a certain point, you're going to open up the book, and maybe you realize that, your motivation for doing that. And sometimes you're just going to open the book up and no other things are going to kind of call for your attention, and you'll just sit and read. And then some days you'll just open the book up or sit down with the book, and that's it. But you're habituating yourself to that same action sequence. And so then you don't have to remind yourself, because the prompt is in this case, the backpack. And you're always going to do that. And by prompting yourself that way, you can essentially cement it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And then to take this a step further, Josh Waitzkin in The Art of Learning talks about priming, where he walks you through the process of developing that whole sequence to get to the behavior pattern that you want. And then if you've chosen something really meaningful that cues that whole sequence, you can actually boil that whole sequence and condense it down to just the first part of that one cue to get to that final behavior pattern.
Can you give me an example or explain, like, what do you mean when you say boiled it?
Yeah. So the example he gave was, there was this client he was coaching who was a salesman, and he's really stressed out, having trouble getting deals and talking to clients on the phone. And so Josh sat down with him and said, hey, what's one activity that you really enjoy doing? And the guy thought for a moment. He said, well, I love it when I'm able to come home and just throw the baseball around with my 10-year-old son. And Josh said, great. That's a good place to start. Now tell me, what kind of music do you like to listen to? And the guy thought for a little bit longer, and he said, I really like Bob Dylan, and the song of his that means the most to me is Blowing in the Wind. And so Josh again said, that's even better. What I want you to do is when you get a few minutes from home, put Blowing in the Wind on, and then when you pull in the driveway, call to your son, get out your baseball gloves, play catch for a bit, and then once you've done that, you will have relaxed a bit. You'll be feeling good. Then go work on that business that you need to get to. That's your most important task for the day. And he did this for a few months, and then Josh started like having him dial it back. So you were throwing the ball with your son for 10 minutes, just toss for a few minutes, toss for a couple minutes, and then he got it all the way back so that the guy could just listen to the first couple lines of Blowing in the Wind as he left the car to walk up the steps for a business meeting, and he was primed to bring his A game
because he had essentially taught his brain with this input. It's almost like a Pavlov's dog deal.
Yeah, it is. It's a really fancy, elaborate Pavlov's dog.
Because we're smarter than dogs, and so we can't just have a bell ringing. We got to have Bob Dylan Blowing in the Wind. Okay. Yeah. So that seems adjacent a little bit to what I was talking, but very like in the same vein.
Because that's more about peak performance. I realized as I was describing it, more about peak performance than it is about behavior modification.
Yeah, but it's helpful, and I don't know that I would have. I mean, you are modifying your behavior, because I know when I was doing back in the day, if you didn't pull in, I don't remember the numbers, so I'm just going to make something up. If you didn't pull in 5 leads in a week, you basically had to get 1 solid lead a day, and you did that for too long, they'd can you, right? When I was doing door-to-door sales. And so if you were on Friday and you hadn't gotten 5 last week and you were only at 2 for this week, and you were stressed about getting the leads,
right?
You really tried to turn it on, people fled. They ran away. They ran away. Nobody would talk to you. And so you had to get into this weird, this headspace of like, it's essentially calm confidence. We wouldn't have been able to articulate it that way because we were all, 18, 19,
right.
Some younger. But, then you would, if you didn't have the calm confidence, then you would, Friday afternoon was garbage for you and you already kind of knew it. And then you'd have, there was a guy and a gal in particular where they would have 10 for the week, right? And then Friday afternoon and they get 5 more. And you're like, because they don't care. And they don't have to. And it was always, that happened to me a few times. And they had those times too. Like nobody's always on fire, but it was like, it just seemed to happen that way. Because if you were good, then Friday afternoon was real good. And if you were bad off that week, then Friday afternoon was like going fishing all day and catching nothing. So yeah, no, that's a helpful way to. It's just another application of the same kind of principle of that. That sequence in our minds is something that you can. It's something that you can kind of trick it.
Well, bringing it back to what we were talking about originally, it's something that we can experiment with. We can see what triggers, what cues are most meaningful to us that will have the biggest impact.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or have no impact, because that can be helpful too. If we realize that at a certain stage in our life that, this thing that maybe it worked for me at one time, maybe it will work in the future, but it really doesn't get me going right now, I should just drop it.
Yeah, well, and another thing is that, so let's say that you're trying to be more understanding of people and you try a behavior. Let's say you've heard a lot of good things about emotional Emotional Quotient. I think it's a book, EQ or EQ squared or something like that. And so you decide that you're going to read that and start to apply some of the things, and you find that it doesn't work for you at all. It's really unhelpful. Like, in fact, it seems like all the relationships in your life are going much worse than they were. Well, maybe you find that, maybe you decide, instead of saying I'm a moron, which is, and I think I've geared the like response to a failed experiment twice that way in our conversation, that I'm bad is essentially can be a response that people have when something that they're doing doesn't work. Instead of focusing on the person, focus on your instead of focusing on you, focus on your behavior. I was trying this recipe and it did not work. So instead of feeling sad that I'm a bad cook, I'm instead going to change the recipe and continue to experiment. So, okay, doing that didn't work. Well, there's these YouTube these two YouTube guys that I've watched they essentially pick apart celebrities, conversations on talk shows and many different things. And I find their insights really helpful, and I have used some of those. And so, like,
like they look at the positive things that people who are in the public eye do.
Yeah, so they'll like, why is Chris Hemsworth so charming? It's like they've done like how to be
One of their top ones.
Yeah, maybe. It was one of the first ones that I watched, and it wasn't titled that. It was like how to be charming in 5 steps or something like that, or how to like
Good
one
copywriting.
of the what's that?
Good copywriting.
Yeah. One of the other ones that I watched was like how to joke well with others, because I know that I am sarcastic, right? How can I do that in a loving way? And they talked about 4 things that you should do and 2 that you shouldn't, right? If you're going to tease, like specifically, they talked about teasing, and the 2 things that you don't tease people on is things that they can't change about themselves or things that are core to their identity. And when you compliment someone, even in a joking way, compliment them on accomplishments. Those are the 3 things that stuck out to me, like accomplishments that they care about. So an example of that is, I think probably one of the most meaningful things I've said or meaningful compliments that I've given my wife recently is that her office is starting to look amazing. She's finally like doing, like, it's she's been working on it for a while, and when I gave her an honest compliment on that, it was striking how much that meant to her.
Right.
And as opposed to telling her that she's beautiful, which is true, and I do tell her that, but it was much more meaningful to her, I think, at least in that moment, like this compliment that was based instead on her accomplishments, if that makes sense. Yeah. So anyway, the whole reason that we were talking about that anyway was because, like, okay, I found something that didn't work. In order to, if I'm trying to, have better relationships or better understanding with people or have empathy or something like that, I need to, read this book. And then this book didn't give me what I wanted. So instead of feeling bad, I try something different and see if that works instead. And having that mindset, that essentially a growth mindset of, instead of thinking of feeling bad about things that don't work, I found something that didn't work, which means I can just put that to bed and move my energies and efforts in a different direction.
Right.
So and that's kind of what we started with this question was, there's the experiment part, and the iteration is going to be the way that you find the things that work best. Because if you don't try new things, if you just keep trying to make the same things work that aren't working, which I think we're tempted to do because we think we should, because we have things that we feel like we ought to do,
or we fear change,
or any number of other reasons. We, instead of taking some time to design our environments, we just let them shape us. So yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. That was where I wanted to get to.
And that's where journaling comes in.
And that is where journaling comes in, which is a fantastic segue for next time.
I actually did start. Well, I wrote things down on something I was thinking about. You
care to share or no? Private?
Oh, it's not private. I was basically thinking about what are laws that should be made versus what are laws that should not be made.
Mm.
And I was thinking through the elements or aspects of a law that should be made. And a lot of this was informed by a book I've been reading called Politics After Christendom by David Van Drunen, who's a professor of down at I don't remember what exactly he's a professor of, but he's a professor down at Westminster Seminary in California.
Is he Polish as well?
No, Van, definitely Dutch.
Okay, fine. You'll have to send me that, guys. It was Politics After Christendom.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I find that with journaling, you can do a better job of evaluating your kind of thought patterns. And I had 3 very difficult conversations, and the relationships themselves are pretty difficult in general. And being able to untangle those, I had tried to talk to a few people about them because that's another way that you can kind of process.
Yeah. And that's how I typically process things.
Yeah,
but it's not as effective, I think.
Yeah, and the reason that it's not as effective is because it's basically rude to use someone else as a way to process.
What if you tell them that's what you're doing?
It can work. It's not
like, and I'm thinking of the time when I asked you to help me process through kind of career decisions.
Yeah, and so once you had my assent, once you had my agreement, yeah, absolutely. It can be really helpful because I can ask you questions that you wouldn't have thought of,
right?
Or essentially force you to work through those questions. Not forced, but when you're asked when you ask yourself a question, it's very easy to let yourself go because you don't have any
skirt around it.
Yeah. But if I ask you a question, then you can. It's just more difficult for you to do that, or it just doesn't work as well. But yeah, and so that can work. For me, I didn't have anybody who had the time when I needed it in order to talk through some of those things. And so I felt like I was kind of finally able to not be wound up over them by spending, it wasn't even really that long. It was probably only an hour of journaling all said and done, and that was over 3 days. And I'm a lot more calm about those things. And yeah, we can talk more about that later and what that looks like.
Yeah, I think actually one of the things I like about the podcast that is similar to what I was noticing when I was writing stuff down is when I'm writing stuff down, I'm able to kind of go back and see what I said before or wrote before. And that helps inform what I write next. And so the same thing with recording the podcast is as I listen to these episodes over again, I'm able to kind of rehash some of those thoughts and build on them in a way that it wasn't the first time I really went through them.
I really appreciate talking with you, making the time. This is good. Yeah, so I'm gonna stop recording. We're done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey guys, it's me, Daniel, again. Just wanted to say thanks for listening to the episode. We hope, again, that it was helpful and that it was enjoyable. If you did enjoy it, go ahead and tell someone who you think would find it helpful for them, and we would really appreciate that. And if you have any feedback, you can email us at socratichobbits@gmail.com. Thanks again.